Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And again, for anybody who's a new listener, you can find this on YouTube, on iTunes, and you can also check it out later on in the week. It is rebroadcast on a bunch of other networks Friday nights from 11 to 1 a.m. And increasingly, you can find my show on Ed Opperman's iTunes feed. So lots of different ways to listen to the show, and of course RSS, and you can download it directly from my website. Quickly, before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to thank a couple of new people who have become subscribers or for some donations. So thank you to Hugo Turner for becoming a subscriber on through Patreon. And Hugo, of course, was a recent guest and is now a subscriber. And I'm always excited when guests become subscribers on the show. And also a quick thank you to Paul and Daniel for your very generous donations on PayPal. So again, if you want to support my work, you can always become a monthly subscriber through Patreon, or you can also give me a one-time donation or a recurring donation on PayPal as well. And interestingly enough, my guest today is a frequent guest on the show and is also a subscriber on Patreon, and that is Brian Heiss. Brian, how are you?
Thank you, Pierce. Good to be with you again. We have breaking OJ Simpson news.
Do we?
This breaking news comes to us from America's most trusted name in news, Radar Online. In her soon-to-be-published book, Caitlyn Jenner claims that Robert Kardashian was motivated to serve as one of O.J. Simpson's defense attorneys during the criminal trial because he was jealous that his ex-wife Kris was happily married to former Olympic gold medalist Bruce Jenner. Caitlyn also claims that Robert Kardashian told her in the late 1990s that he believed that O.J. murdered Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. Despite Caitlyn Jenner concocting the most delusional story, which defies all logic, I want to take a moment to wish her a speedy recovery from her recent surgery. We'll continue to follow this late-breaking story. Back to you, Pierce.
Very, very exciting stuff. Obviously, for people who are unaware, Brian is one of my go-to guys for OJ-related news and theories and discussions, and we will be discussing OJ today. But in a sort of a more of a broader context, similar to some of the stuff that we've spoken about in the past. But, first, I guess, Brian, first and foremost, before we kind of dive into, how the OJ trial has created an environment, in media that we're living in today. And bear with us. It's going to be, it'll be a regular 2-hour show, but bear with us because we are going to bring this all around to what is going on right now in terms of Syria. But, Brian, before we kind of dive into that, or I guess this is sort of leading into this discussion, there has been a flurry of articles recently. Obviously, we did this one on Radar Online, but there's been this recent flurry of articles talking about the supposed negotiations between O.J. Simpson and none other than Casey Anthony, that they are going to be starring in a reality show together. And I first saw this, and then I, of course, had a bunch of listeners of mine emailing me saying, asking my opinion on this, what's going on. I was sort of mystified at the whole thing. It didn't really seem real or plausible. And then we were kind of talking about this in emails, and we were talking yesterday about this as well. And this all essentially sources back to the only interesting article that TMZ has ever put out. And this is what all of these other mainstream media outlets, gossip columns, the whole sort of gamut. Of course, it's OJ, so everybody's going to talk about it. So everyone from the New York Times to Us Weekly is going to report on OJ Simpson and, of course, Casey Anthony doing a reality show together. Now, all these articles are extremely vague as to the specifics of this. They just basically say that there's I don't know, rumors or what, that they're going to be starring together in some sort of reality show. God only knows what that would look like. But this is essentially a completely made-up story. This is fake news at its best.
It is.
You kind of brought this to my attention. So, Brian, we now live in a world where everything is seemingly everything is fake, on both sides of the aisle. Everyone is throwing these accusations, and I gotta say, I fucking hate the term fake news. I hate that it's sort of taken on this life of its own, and you can't even use it as just a sort of generic phrase. People kind of act like this is this new thing, like when the president is saying fake news, somehow the word fake and the word news, when put together, is some sort of new phrase that only was invented in 2017. But of course, people have said that term before, but it's sort of like, it's almost like a different word. This story is the epitome of fake news, and it's the epitome of how fake news becomes viral news and then becomes accepted fact. And it colors people's minds and stuff. And as I said, we're going to be talking about this and how this is, relates exactly to what's going on with the mounting escalation of the war in Syria. But, Brian, before we kind of dive into all of that, what in the hell is going on with this TMZ article? And you actually kind of have a little bit of an inside track as to these rumors of a show between OJ Simpson and Casey Anthony. So give us a little background. What's actually in this article itself, and tell us a little bit about how this went so viral.
On March 10th, 2017, TMZ published what was really a great article. The week before, it had come out in news reports that O.J. Simpson could potentially be paroled from Lovelock Correctional Facility in October of 2017. TMZ, as a follow-up, did something really cool. They did an informal survey of reality TV production companies, TV agents, and various platforms that might carry, TV channels, Netflix, those types of folks. And they did this informal survey about potential opportunities for O.J. Simpson following his release. Now, the findings of TMZ's informal anonymous survey are quite intriguing. All of the agents, production companies, or platforms that TMZ spoke with stated that they would not work with O.J. Simpson on a project. Everyone that they spoke to said that they would not work with O.J. Simpson on a project. However, many of the people that they spoke to said, while we won't do anything with him, I'm sure that someone else might do something with him. Then they also asked them, where you think that if anyone would do anything with OJ, where you think it might air. And what they said was that the public would not tolerate a broadcast or cable news outlet doing something with OJ. There would be no advertisers for it. The backlash would be too great. The producers that they spoke with suggested that the only possible platform for an O.J. Simpson project is pay-per-view. Again, great story by TMZ, great follow-up to the news that O.J. was going to be released. Their findings were almost unanimous in everyone that they spoke to said that they wouldn't touch O.J. with a 10-foot pole. This story is the basis for every single story since. And in something that's uncommon these days in reporting, they actually cite this TMZ story as the basis for their stories that O.J. Simpson is going to do a reality TV show when he's released. And then you saw this kind of snowball effect where those stories hit one week, and then the next week it became O.J. Simpson and Casey Anthony, a woman that was acquitted of killing her daughter in 2011, I think.
2011, 2012.
And then there was, then it became reports in the Mirror in the UK that OJ Simpson would join the cast of Celebrity Big Brother UK in January 2018. Now, this was interesting because one of the obstacles to getting a passport is being a convicted felon. So it would be difficult for OJ to turn around a passport that quickly, considering that he probably would be on some sort of parole or supervised release once he gets out. And then, most importantly, people forget that the reason that OJ Simpson has chosen not to work is because, contrary to popular belief, OJ is actually a pretty smart guy, and a pretty smart guy financially. OJ Simpson had set up through two of his companies, OJ Simpson Enterprises and Orenthal Productions, pension funds for himself, and he would put a certain amount of money into his pension fund each month. Pension funds are, by federal law, pension funds are shielded from petitioners, pensioners and creditors. So if he was indebted to someone, such as the Goldman family, the pensions are untouchable. He also has an NFL pension, which is, a very small pension. But O.J. Simpson wanted to retire comfortably, and early on in his career set up structures to guarantee that he'd have a sizable income until he dies, over $25,000 a month. O.J. Simpson told Katie Couric in 2000, "If I had to work to fund what I believe is a wrong decision, I probably would not work." He responded to a follow-up question by stating, "I would never do anything that if it's going to benefit that verdict. I don't think that verdict was just." OJ's position on this has never wavered, and he's been adamant about it. So the fact that the idea that he would, when he gets out of prison, work and earn money when that money would just go to pay the Goldmans is ludicrous. But watching the media play this story, every day I have OJ Simpson as one of my Google alerts in my RSS newsfeed. So each day there's a new story about OJ Simpson and reality TV. I can unequivocally state for you as a fact that there is no reality TV project, even in discussions between OJ Simpson and Casey Anthony, and there are no discussions with OJ Simpson currently to do anything when he's released from prison. Reality TV is not a priority for Mr. Simpson. In fact, when the story with Casey Anthony gets a little interesting because they brought in a common denominator, common person between Casey Anthony and O.J. Simpson. Pat McKenna was the lead investigator for the defense of both of their trials, both the Casey Anthony trial and the O.J. Simpson trial. I know Pat McKenna quite well, and he had called me, it was a couple of Fridays ago, and I said, "Pat, I'm surprised to hear from you. You're all over the news." He said, "What do you mean?" And I explained to him that apparently he's coordinating this reality TV project with Casey Anthony and O.J. Simpson after O.J.'s released from Lovelock. And we both shared a good laugh about it. And he obviously said, this is completely untrue. But more importantly, I asked him, were you contacted by email, phone, text, by any of these reporters that are writing these stories attributing you being the focal point of this reality TV project? And he said, no, not a single person has contacted me about this. And to me, that was quite kind of mind-blowing because here are all these stories, and it goes from NBC News to Radar Online and everything in between that are including Pat McKenna in this story about this project and they include details, yet none of these reporters, if we can call them that, took the time to contact Pat McKenna for comment, for denial, for confirmation, for anything. And to me, that is really telling of the state of journalism today.
No, especially when it's it's a pretty simple story to confirm or deny. It's not as if Pat McKenna is a difficult person to get a hold of. If you're a journalist or something. It's not as if, I bet it's probably easy to even get Casey Anthony, to some degree. I mean, she's a public person. It's not difficult to ask OJ. You could ask OJ's lawyers. This isn't as if it's not like these people are, in the wind and it's hard to confirm these things. Yet, as you say, nobody even went that far. And even more bizarre is that this is all predicated on a TMZ article that unequivocally states nobody wants to even touch him. That article is basically saying that, based on their research into the reality show world, that nobody actually wants to do anything with OJ. Yet, all of these articles begin popping up saying that it's definitely happening. And the Big Brother one is ridiculous because, you have to alert your parole officer when you leave the state. Forget going out of the country. That's so far, that's so beyond the pale. And interestingly too, Brian, maybe you want to kind of talk about this for a little bit, but there, of course, Casey Anthony and OJ kind of share, beyond Pat McKenna, they also share this sort of vitriolic hatred from the public. And, full disclosure, I know pretty much nothing about the Casey Anthony case.
Me too.
One way or the other. Yeah. But we're just the way that the media basically, she's guilty.
Yeah.
And here's all the evidence.
If you look at the media coverage of different criminal trials since, including OJ Simpson. Now, OJ Simpson was probably the most beloved black man in America on June 12th, 1994, before this happened. He was a very public figure. He had been for decades. A lot of the way that the media covered the OJ Simpson saga, while it was very tabloidy, you could see some justification for it because this man was a public figure. Then you have a private citizen, Casey Anthony, who was given the exact same treatment by the media as OJ Simpson, a public figure. And to me, there's something kind of scary when you take a completely private person and give them the OJ treatment of trying to expose every little aspect of their life, and more importantly, judging their guilt or innocence, and the media trying to convince the public of their guilt and innocence before a single piece of evidence has been introduced in a court of law. And that's very scary because it could be done to anyone, as we saw today with the gentleman that was beat up by the United Airlines crew.
Yes. No, and again, regardless whether Casey Anthony is guilty or not guilty, that's sort of beyond the point. That's not the point of this. The point is that, as you said, a private person accused of a very serious crime is basically found to be guilty before even, anything is even, she's even been charged. You know what I mean? I think she was charged. But then you get news outlets, credible news outlets, going through her Facebook. Oh, look at these pictures of her, the night of the murder, and look, she's having fun, and she's sort of promiscuous, and it's very easy to find these pictures of her smiling and looking sort of bizarre, and that's supposed to mean, that's supposed to represent evidence in a court of law. Now, if she's guilty or if she's not guilty, it doesn't matter, because what happens when a truly innocent person is accused of the exact same thing and the media goes through the exact same process? That's a very troubling state that we're in.
It's almost like getting the crowd with their pitchforks and torches all assembled and all protesting before anyone even knows the facts of the matter. I think that's what we saw in both OJ and Casey Anthony. Again, I really don't know anything about the Casey Anthony case except for a small bit of understanding how the media covered it and how they made judgments before any facts were revealed. And I think that, like I said, with OJ, you can almost understand it because he was one of the most famous people in America. But when you take a private citizen and give them that same treatment, you have to think that could be anyone. That could be you. That could be me if we were involved in some sort of crime. And that could be done to us. And that's pretty scary if you think about it.
And again, too, I mean, it's now reached a level where apparently you can make up. I understand people interested in the concept of would OJ do a reality show, because everybody does a reality show.
Yeah.
But to go from TMZ asking the question, would anyone do that, to Casey Anthony is in it.
Yeah.
She has nothing to do with this, yet she is intrinsically linked.
The genesis of that was in March 2017, the Associated Press published the first interview with Casey Anthony since she was acquitted in 2011. The interview was published in 3 parts. The March 9th, 2017, AP published part 2 of the interview under the headline, and again, this is the Associated Press that did this headline, Casey Anthony, quote, a lot of parallels to OJ Simpson's case. Now, that's a headline you would expect to read in the New York Post, not the Associated Press. Mm. And the article completely focused on the idea that Casey Anthony and saw a connection between herself and OJ Simpson. It was almost distorted to the point that the AP was almost making something where there was nothing.
Right.
And for the Associated Press to do that, that's really messed up.
Well, it's just, do you have nothing better to do? And I think I'm all for, interview Casey Anthony. I'm interested in what she has to say. As this once private figure who's now unfortunately, very public. But yeah, exactly, to somehow puff this up into this, again, this is what's so interesting. The mainstream media poo-poos any thought that there's a conspiracy, or that there were at least people that, conspired, whether it was one person or 2 people, to frame OJ in some respect. They poo-poo that, but they're all willing to accept that there's a conspiracy between, Casey Anthony and OJ Simpson, and they're all in it together. And, anyone, that's acquitted wrongfully of killing someone, what does that make them, friends, and or comrades in arms? And all she's really saying is,
apparently the AP imagines life as that South Park episode with OJ, the Ramses, and Gary Condit.
Yeah, exactly. But speaking a little bit more broadly, Brian, this OJ Anthony reality show story is a perfect example of how the media operates on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
Where, it's like, as I said, this fake news meme has infected every facet of the media, both mainstream and alternative. And and now they use it, they throw it back and forth to the point where basically, they don't even really care whether the story is true or not. And there's this consensus that even when the story isn't true, it's okay because it fits the perception that people want to believe. And Ed Opperman has been talking about this on and off on his show. This is that you'll see these sort of fake news stories about whatever, Bill Gates, and vaccines or it doesn't matter. It could be anything. And there's really no validity to it. He never actually said that. But it's okay because it fits in with the perception of Bill Gates as this evil globalist who wants to, vaccinate everybody. And that's, there is a bit of truth to that, but that doesn't give you the right to promote bullshit. And more and more, we see the alternative media going to these unsourced stories that fit in with their idea of a conspiracy theory. Look at the whole Pizzagate debacle. And that happened virtually overnight. But the mainstream media is, of course, really guilty of this on a daily basis as well. And in some ways, I think is, it has a larger impact.
I think that there was a time, and I would say if you go back to the coverage of Watergate, the use of unnamed sources, for example, Deep Throat, was very uncommon and very limited because the idea was always to have a second attribution, a second confirmation of any information that you were publishing from a source. Now, if you look at the coverage of Watergate, all of the stuff that Woodward and Bernstein attributed to Deep Throat, they also had to, Ben Bradley also made them confirm with two other sources that would confirm that information that was provided to them by Deep Throat. It was somewhat uncommon at that time to use these unnamed sources. And Ben Bradley and Woodward and Bernstein set up a very strict verification process in order to use Deep Throat as the unnamed source. What we've seen, probably starting with Simpson, if not before, maybe around Contra, what we've seen is the proliferation of the use of these sources, quote-unquote sources, from everything from a couple years ago during the Olympics where we had the toothpaste bombs. Do you remember the toothpaste bombs? That the toothpaste bombs were going to blow up airplanes, or a couple weeks ago that we're banning laptops from certain airlines because we believe that the terrorists have gotten a hold of our airport security systems, or perhaps the new models come out, the new model of airport security systems come out and, they need to make a sale. But the use of sources is quite troubling because what the use of sources does is, well, there's twofold. First of all, you have, when you're using unnamed sources so much in articles that, it's inappropriate to use them. When someone actually uses them in an important manner, for example, Seymour Hersh, the Rat Line article that he did, when he used unnamed sources for his reporting on the chemical weapons attack in Syria in 2013, he was called a conspiracy theorist and whatnot. But what Hersh discovered was quite profound and quite accurate. But his use of unnamed sources didn't have the same gravitas as it would have, 20 years ago, because it's so common to use unnamed sources in every article.
Yeah.
And often I'll read an article and you'll see sources tell, and I just wonder if that is just the reporter making something up because, he needed to finish the story. And I'm not joking, because it's used in the most worthless articles often. And that really diminishes the credibility and the gravitas of the unnamed source, the information from them.
No, I know. And at a level, as you said, where it really is like, could you not find somebody who would go on the record? It's sort of, because sometimes it'll be not like an innocuous article, but like, come on, nobody. You couldn't even say, unnamed sources within such and such's inner circle, and I understand, nobody wants to, there's this perception in Washington and other places, that, leaks are terrible, but it's like everybody leaks. Come on, Absolutely. Get over it. This is how the media works, especially in places like Washington.
The other thing that unnamed sources does is it prevents the public from getting evidence provided to the public. So unnamed sources serves as this umbrella that is often substitution for a demand to, whether it be the State Department, whether it be the Defense Department, that they provide materials to back up their claim.
No, and look at the way I want to get to it a little bit more later, but again, with what's going on in Syria, it's so easy this is just sources, intelligence sources are telling us this is what it is. And they very well might be, but we don't know who those intelligence sources are.
And are those intelligence sources working for some of the defense contractors in this country that would benefit from a U.S. attack on Syria, that their bank accounts would grow with this information that they're providing?
Yeah, and it also is, created this disgusting symbiotic relationship between the power structure as it exists and the media, which have basically just become the facilitate. They're just PR firms for
Stenographers.
For these larger institutions. And I think this is probably like most of my listeners, if not all of my listeners, are fairly aware of this. But again, as you said, I think in so many ways, the OJ trial kind of set the stage for this to become completely normalized. And I know that sounds a little wacky, but again, I encourage people, go back and listen to some of my interviews with Steven Singular, because he talked about this over and over and over again, that the media coverage of OJ was so intense, yet all of the truth that was found or that was discovered through evidence in that case is just brushed aside. And the public completely accepts bold-faced lies. And when you can do that, when you can have a trial that's that covered, then you can convince people that, well, we need to bomb Syria, like right away, because these kids are dying. And if if you ask for evidence, if you question it, well, what are you, a Russian, agent or a Syrian agent? The people could see that. I forget what her name was, the CNN anchor. Kate Bolden, I think. Yeah. And she's mystified at some little, nobody congressman. I forget where he was from, but he was nobody in particular of any great importance, who was just sort of, I'm a little, I'm a little weary about some of these assertions, and I'm not sure who did it. And it's like, how dare you? How dare you even question this?
How dare you question the spokespeople of our Defense Department and State Departments, because they would never not tell the truth. But there's one factor that you left out of that excellent explanation is during the OJ Simpson trial, for example, CNN's ratings went up 800%. The OJ Simpson trial allowed the corporations that control the news media to understand that the news could be a profit center. And it's kind of why you see breaking news all the time on CNN, because people, when they see breaking news on the lower third on their TV, they pay attention. So even the most innocuous story will now become breaking news because it drives up ratings and it drives up profits for the network. That was really a big part of the big change in the coverage was this is what people like because our ratings have gone up 800% covering this trial. And our revenues have increased dramatically. I think that $15 million in 1994 and 95 is what CNN profited from the Simpson trial. I don't know what that would be in today's terms, but it would be a lot more.
A lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the type of thing that you're getting. You're getting, if you look at who owns the news, and look at their ties to defense contractors, for example, you'll find that almost every one of the 6 companies that control 90% of the news media in the United States have government contracts that are significant through their parent corporations. And there's a reason for them to want to be supportive of a war or want to do things that will be sensationalized to get ratings as opposed to reporting the facts.
Well, and let's kind of dissect that a little bit more because we'll start with OJ, the OJ trial, because it is such a good example of this. But I
have a great thing that we could start on that. But go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, there are multiple facts, quote, in air quotes, that many people have put forth with regards to OJ that are 100% complete, utter bullshit. Yet they are continually pointed to. And we've seen these lies have been perpetuated both by the FX dramatization, the OJ trial, the People vs. OJ Simpson, and also with the Ezra Edelman documentary, OJ Made in America. And if you doubt the significance of these, Edelman just won an Academy Award, and the FX show has won Golden Globes and Emmys for in virtually every category. So again, they've elevated these. These are now the official story. Again, this is exactly what Tom Secker and I talk about when you see the CIA getting involved in, let's retell how we actually funded the Mujahideen. Let's retell what we really did in Iran or in the early 50s and in OSS. They are creating the official narrative, and that's what these two shows have done. And Brian, lately you have been picking out a couple of this sort of just incredible, silly lies. Lies that are important to the overall structure of the case, but they're so dumb. There's Let's start with a quick one. Because and this is the glove not fitting because OJ Simpson stopped taking his arthritis medicine. This is made in the OJ Made in America. And I gotta tell you, and I'm sure you've suffered the same thing. All of my friends said, yeah, but what about that? Did you watch that in OJ Made in America? I mean, the glove didn't fit because he stopped taking his arthritis medicine. And you made a quick little, I think it's 9 minutes. A great YouTube video that we'll link up to. And just explain, I mean, why is that a lie?
Why is the glove didn't fit because OJ didn't take his arthritis medications a lie? It's very simple because the doctor for the Los Angeles County Jail says so, and it was brought up in official court proceedings. Sean Chapman Hawley, female defense attorney for Mr. Simpson, was tasked with investigating this claim that Chris Darden had made at sidebar, that he believes that Chris Darden claims that OJ didn't take his arthritis medication, and that's why the gloves didn't fit. So Johnny Cochran tasked Sean Chapman Hawley to find out what the reality was. And Sean Chapman presented a report from the doctor at the LA County Jail that Mr. Simpson has taken his arthritis medication every day. He has not missed a single time of taking a dosage. And I don't know if most of your listeners are probably not familiar with the fact that when you're in jail taking medication, it's supervised. They watch you swallow. The nurse who gives you the medication watches you swallow it and make sure that you swallowed it each time that they give you a dose. And it was so easy to prove that lie. But you have what I did leading up to that crescendo of the truth is present all of the different tellings of this lie. And one of them is from former LA County District Attorney Gil Garcetti, who was on Good Morning America talking about how fabulous this OJ Made in America was because for the first time he learned something that he didn't know during the trial. That, can you believe it, George Stephanopoulos, that OJ Simpson didn't take his arthritis medication, and that's why the gloves didn't fit. And I put as the lower third graphic on there, I put former LA County District Attorney Gil Garcetti believes that OJ Simpson did not take his arthritis medication because someone said so in a movie he saw.
And that person in question is real scumbag and not to be trusted.
Mike Gilbert, who was O.J. Simpson's agent specifically for setting up autograph sessions at card shows, at baseball card shows or football card shows.
Yeah.
That was his whole role as quote-unquote O.J.'s agent. He set up football card appearances, autograph sessions. That was it. He didn't negotiate any of O.J.'s contracts. O.J. did that himself. But watching how that became the idea that he stopped taking his arthritis medication became the biblical truth was quite stunning because it was so easy to find the actual facts of the reality. It was so easy to find and present in this very short documentary. It was astonishing that someone's winning Academy Awards for presenting complete and utter bullcrap.
Yeah, and again, even when you present that to people, and I have, and I've said, check out this thing. Well, I don't know, but you should really check out OJ Made in America. And it's like, so you can watch a 7.5-hour documentary full of lies, but you can't watch a 9-minute video that completely refutes that unequivocally. And again, that kind of goes back to this, well, they know it's a lie, but they will accept the lie because it fits their perception, their ideal perception of what happened. That the glove didn't fit because OJ did something to it, And now, of course, then it becomes, it was a conspiracy. The doctor at the LA, county jail was in on it and wanted to protect OJ, and
it's ludicrous, but people will choose to believe it.
The story. And again, this is a small little example, but these sorts of, the way that we've just sort of accepted that completely. And again, believe me, when you're giving this guy an Academy Award, you're saying the truth doesn't matter.
In a lot of ways, yes.
Because this fits what we want to believe. That he is guilty, that he was a wife beater who escalated into brutal murder. You're accepting that the truth doesn't matter and that instead emotion matters.
Another thing that has been presented in a very distorted manner with the OJ case is the blood evidence. The blood evidence, all you hear is that the defense and anyone who thinks OJ is innocent allege this great big conspiracy. Now, this is probably going to be the subject of my next short documentary, but I'm going to give everyone a sneak preview today. And the facts about a lot of the blood evidence in this case. Prior to the start of the trial, one of the defense investigators, a guy named Bill Pavlik, shared a photograph with the defense team which showed the outside of O.J. Simpson's reference blood sample vial. It was stained and caked with blood. Anyone who's watched Making the Murderer is probably familiar with caked blood on the outside of a vial. Now, after seeing the photograph, defense attorney Barry Scheck was determined to establish the sequence of events in the lab on June 14th, 1994, the day that OJ's reference sample was put in, and they started to do a lot of the testing of the evidence. Now, the guy testing the evidence was Colin Yamaguchi, who was a criminalist with the LAPD. Yamaguchi was not allowed to do any pre-testimony sessions with the defense team. All Scheck had was Yamaguchi's notes, and most of them were undated. So Scheck had to piece together the order in which he believed that Yamaguchi tested different materials. Now, on May 30th, 1995, while undergoing cross-examination by Barry Scheck, Colin Yamaguchi, the LAPD criminalist, testified that on June 14th, 1994, he had spilled some of the blood from the vial of O.J. Simpson's reference sample and admitted that the blood had leaked through a chem wipe onto his laboratory glove while he handled 3 different vials: Nicole Simpson, Ron Goldman's, and O.J. Simpson's. Yamaguchi testified that the blood might have reached the work table that he had a lot of the evidence on, and he did not change his gloves after the spill occurred. When one examines the evidence Colin Yamaguchi handled on June 14th, something quite remarkable is revealed. The swatch with the largest quantity of O.J. Simpson's DNA was the first thing that Colin Yamaguchi handled that morning after the spill, which was the Rockingham glove. Now, the next thing that Yamaguchi handled was Bundy swatch number 51. And guess what? That swatch had slightly less DNA on it than the Rockingham glove. The next thing he handled was the next thing he handled was a swatch, after he handled the swatch containing the second highest quantity of OJ's DNA, the next thing he touched had even less on it. And it was like stepping into a mud puddle, then continuing onto dry ground. Your footprint leaves a lot of mud in the first step. The next one leaves a bit less. The third leaves a bit less. And you have these footprints from the glove to the different Bundy blood swatches that Yamaguchi handled on June 14th, 1994, with the least amount of blood being on the last thing he handled that morning. So the sequence becomes quite clear. Yamaguchi has the spill, doesn't change his gloves, spills a little on the table, and he transfers OJ's blood from his reference sample, the blood that the LAPD took on June 13th, 1994, when O.J. Simpson voluntarily went in to be questioned without his lawyers and to be examined. His whole body was examined, where they saw that there was no bruises on his body. And he transfers O.J.'s blood to the Rockingham glove, which is pretty obvious when you consider how the events of the day. Next, he handles the Bundy swatches and contaminates them with Simpson's blood. This is Yamaguchi testified and basically confirmed this pattern that I just laid out. No conspiracy, no theory, just actually the facts of how that blood got onto those various swatches. And people are probably wondering, what about the blood that was taken in the original swatches from the crime scene where they, picked up the blood? Dennis Fung, the criminalist that was collecting the blood along with Andrea Mazzola, put all of the samples into a hot LAPD evidence van, which had the refrigeration was broken in that van. So you're in this hot metal car. It was like 80 degrees that day, and the blood samples are in there for up to 12 hours in the hot sun, because remember, they first got there in the early morning hours, and they didn't get back to the LAPD lab until later at night, after 8 p.m. It's scientifically proven that in those environments, the original samples could have degraded. Oh, wow. I need to get my hooked on phonics going so I can read a little bit better. There was degradation to those blood samples, so they almost became unusable. So it would be interesting to see if there was even any DNA available if Yamauchi hadn't spilled OJ's reference sample and was just not tidy. And I don't blame a lot of that on Colin Yamauchi. I blame a lot of that on the fact that there was no procedure manual at LAPD Crime Lab in June of 1994. There were no standards. There were no how-tos provided to a criminalist in the LA County Crime Lab in June of 1994. They just didn't care about the specifics.
And I mean, and that's I think a larger pattern of the LAPD, where the facts can be kind of massaged, it's okay. It doesn't really, because ultimately they know they're going to get their man or woman or whomever. I mean, and again, that goes back to so much of the basis of the whole defense's case, is that, I mean, you're dealing with one of the more corrupt police organizations on the globe, and they play so fast and loose. And that's not to say, and you can still even look at that and be like, he did it, but they screwed up so much, And again, that you can look at this from a guilty, innocent, whatever, but when there is truly an innocent person involved in, and that sort of happens, then what? We just sort of say, whatever, accept it?
Well, I mean, the fact is, what we just reviewed isn't some theory that you or I have. It's actually facts that come from the testimony of the guy that actually did the testing, and he confirmed that he made these errors, which resulted in, and as it was clear from anyone who would look at the evidence, where you have the most DNA from OJ Simpson on the first thing he handles and the least DNA from OJ Simpson on the last thing he handles. I mean, you can't be any more obvious, and the jury got it.
Yeah. Well, so much of this...
But the media didn't cover it. The media, and it's never been presented in that manner. It's always been presented in a manner, if people have conspiracy theories about the LAPD went around planting OJ's blood. No, it's actually much simpler than that. It's that the guy was a dummy that was doing the testing, and he was careless, and that's how OJ's blood got on there. You can't look at this if you're a logical person and look at the percentages of DNA found from the first thing he handled to the last thing he handled, and honestly tell me that is from anything other than a guy with bloody hands on his glove, the blood from the reference vial on his hands, which are gloved, transferring when you touch it. It's like when you're bleeding, if you take a piece of paper to it, try to clot the blood, then take another piece of paper, you're probably going to have a little less blood on the next piece of paper. Or tissue paper, I should say.
Well, and again, Brian, this is sort of circling back to what we were talking about, where it's again, the truth doesn't matter in this case. Really what matters is emotion and people's perceptions and people's desire they want to believe something different. And again, this is so much the environment that we live in today, where we don't even have to go through like deconstructing this or coming up with ways of excusing all of this. If you see an article that you don't like, that's fake news. It's not real.
Or you could probably find an article that says the exact opposite of what you don't like, and then you choose that news source because their news is more adaptable to your ideology. And, where do folks that actually like facts go for their news? And I know it's probably a struggle that you and I have every day when, you know, you put actual facts over any political ideology or party allegiance. You strive for the truth and strive for knowledge and not this biased or agenda-oriented version of the news.
And also, people really should keep in mind that all of this was broadcast on the news. You know, every little aspect of the OJ trial was broadcast. You could tune in and watch it. I mean, it's all there if you were paying attention.
It's all there, but they also chose to cover certain things. Remember the thing about the Furman tapes?
Yes,
the Furman tapes aired live on the different networks that were documenting, that was broadcasting the trial live. But unless you were watching at 11:30 a.m. Pacific on August 29th, 1995, you've never heard all of the Furman tapes because despite countless hours of coverage in prime time, the Furman tapes have never been rebroadcast to this day by any broadcast outlet. And that should be the most telling thing because probably the most critically important piece of evidence ever presented at the OJ Simpson trial, not pertaining so much to the trial, but pertaining to society as a whole, was completely ignored by the news media because it didn't fit their agenda.
Right. And it very much negated their whole, no, it's not about race, or they're just playing the race card, and you're like, well, they are, but with good reason. I mean, listen to this guy. And then, of course, you can kind of extrapolate that out, and you can see that not only is Furman talking about in these tapes about planting evidence and framing people, but Furman is the guy. He is Johnny on the spot every time a key piece of evidence is found.
And he talks about on the tapes. He talks about when you have someone that you think is guilty, you do what it takes to get them convicted. You spice up the evidence how you need to.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no clearer example of it than Furman's handling of the Joseph Britton case, where he had shot Joseph Britton and then planted a knife next to Joseph Britton and called him the N-word. And Joseph Britton received a sizable settlement from Los Angeles County because Furman did these things to him.
Yeah, and the idea that
Mark Furman absolutely. The idea that Mark Furman planted evidence is not the craziest thing anyone's ever heard, because if he didn't, why would LAPD pay out Joseph Britton?
Right. Well, and just listen to him bragging about it, over and over again. But Brian, we're getting up towards the end here, and I kind of want to build on this a little bit more, a bit with OJ in the second hour. But also kind of, again, expand this out into what's going on in Syria, and maybe also talking more broadly too about this sort of rise in this fascination with crime and crime documentaries, and the way that almost all of them are kind of they really kind of they pick and choose so carefully what's fact, what's fiction, and what we can portray as fact when we know it's kind of fiction, and the sort of larger ramifications of that. Because again, I really do see a very clear line between the way that the American public in particular views crime documentaries and views the act of murder, and the way that it is covered, and the way that people kind of, you instantly have to take a side. You're either with them or against them. And that, again, is exactly the way we view going to war. There's almost no there's really nothing different between the two of them. And if anything, when we go to war, there's even less evidence,
And the one common denominator is that the way that certain victims are presented in a compassionate, compelling way, and certain victims are completely ignored, not even acknowledged by the news media.
Exactly. And excellent. We are right on the break. So we will be continuing this in the second hour with my guest, Brian Heiss.
I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio, Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys, because they have all the technology, they have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Did you know there are 3 million edible food plants on Earth, and none have the nutritional value of the hemp plant? HempUSA.org offers you hemp protein powder. It does not contain chemicals or THC, is non-GMO, and is 100% gluten-free. Hemp protein powder burns fat, builds muscle, contains 53% protein, and feeds the body the nutrients it needs. Call 888-910-4367 and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org. HempUSA.org introduces 3 brand new detox formulations of microplant powder. Brain Fuel for depression, bipolar disorders, and stress. Total Care, anti-cancer agent that cleans the liver and organs and increases memory. Rejuvenate, invigorates and heals the body, mind, and spirit. These products are your alternative to pharmaceuticals. Call 888-910-4367 and like us on Facebook. We ship worldwide. Only at HempUSA.org.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
What about show business? Show business, completely dishonest, corrupt, and full of shit, but in a nice way. Plenty of expensive drugs and perverted sex. If you're going to be full of shit, might as well enjoy your work. Then you have the media. Not just the news media, let's include them all. The media are almost literally exploding with bullshit. Because they're located right at the crossroads of all the other bullshit. The media are made up of equal parts advertising, politics, business, public relations, and show business. These people are sitting right at bullshit junction. There's enough bullshit in the media for Texas to open a branch office. And you still have enough left over to start 2 law firms and a Christian bookstore.
What has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Provide us for free education?
Well, that's obviously effective, but apart from reversing the dumbing down of America...
All the information they provide is free?
What about the free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, man?
Exploiting commonplace corruption?
They help vulnerable people who don't have a voice?
Bringing light to important information nobody else does.
Or they never censor, hang up, or cut off their guests? Well, that's no fun, is it?
Oh, they created a fantastic alternative media source during an era of bad, manipulative, and infiltrated mainstream and alternative media shows and scum.
Okay, well, apart from the free education, free information, free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, exposing commonplace corruption, helping vulnerable people without a voice, bringing light to important information nobody else does, and creating a fantastic commercial-free alternative media source in a sea of bad, manipulative mainstream and alternative media shills and scum, what has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Donate to American Freedom Radio today. No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City. Your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are just joining us right now, we are joined by frequent guest and good friend and subscriber to Porkins Policy Radio, Brian Heiss. And just quickly, that we're mentioning subscribers, there is a new subscriber bonus podcast out there. So if you are a subscriber at the $5 level, you will of course get access to it. And it's a really, really good episode that Tom Secker and I did based on the 1986 made-for-TV movie Under Siege, which is one of the most amazing movies that just kind of like, flew. I didn't really fly under the radar. It was pretty controversial then, and it's still controversial now, but not a lot of people know about it. But it deals with terrorism in D.C. and CIA shenanigans and Iranian double agents and a whole mess of stuff. Really good conversation that Tom and I had. So check that out if you have not already.
Not the Steven Seagal one. Steven Seagal is not in this movie.
Yeah, I know, and it was funny, like, Tom was like, oh, yeah, we're not that desperate, don't worry, and I didn't say it, but I actually kind of love Under Siege, so I'm a big fan of that movie, even though it is super cheesy, but I love all of, like, Tommy Lee Jones's ridiculous, lines, and when he gets his eyeballs gouged out, that's pretty awesome, and I love the scene where
Dr. Richard Kimball!
Yeah, and then just the scene where they're cutting up, like, raw meat and eating it. I don't know why, but it always makes me laugh. But anyway, on to more important topics. Brian and I, in the first hour, of course, were talking about the legacy of OJ Simpson and the legacy of the trial, the legacy that the media has had up to now. And again, we're talking about this meme, fake news. It's everywhere, right? But this has existed for many, many years. And so much of the way that the mainstream and the alternative media condenses fake news or accepts fake news, much of this is a legacy of the way that the OJ Simpson trial was covered. And we were talking about towards the end of the first hour there, Brian, we were talking about this whole BS lie about the glove not fitting because OJ stopped taking his medication. And we were also, talking about, the fact that that's in the now Academy Award-winning documentary OJ Made in America, which is also very bizarre. TV documentaries like that, especially multi-part ones, are rarely nominated.
But they're no longer eligible. They've made a rule change in the last week that multi-part documentaries are no longer eligible for the Academy Awards.
Fascinating. Amazing that, this one on OJ is the one that wins the Academy Award. And on the flip side of that, because that has been, again, sort of perpetuating so many stories that are BS, and people want to accept them.
A lot of the OJ Made in America is based on this quote that's attributed to OJ, but OJ's never said it. It's, quote, "I'm not black, I'm OJ." And the origin of that, and that serves as your understanding, if you haven't seen OJ Made in America, if you just listen to that quote, "I'm not black, I'm OJ," you'll understand a lot of what's woven into that film. It's based on this "I'm not black, I'm OJ" idea, and how OJ existed in within different racial groups throughout his time as a public figure. But the quote, "I'm not black, I'm OJ," is never said by Mr. Simpson. The origin, the genesis, is a 2002 HBO documentary, OJ in Black and White, and it was said by Professor Harry Edwards, a sociology professor at University of California. He said, "I'm not black, I'm OJ," not OJ Simpson.
And of course, Ezra Edelman, the director, never states that. He just, and if you, any interview with Edelman, he always talks about that quote. And again, and he says, that is like the whole structure of, he said going into the movie, he's like, well, of course I knew he was guilty, but that never really factored into my mind because this is really, about race and, the way that the police were treating, black Americans, particularly black, Americans out in LA, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, that's true. And I think that's interesting. And that serves a purpose.
To his credit, in the documentary, he exposed a lot of very horrific events in the history of LA policing, particularly LA policing and the African American community. He did a brilliant job in many of these flashback scenes, which documented the horrible racial history between the LAPD and the citizens. And I applaud him for that. But the fact of the matter is that when it came to something real and something substantive, like the Furman tapes, he pretty much glossed over that and treated Mark Furman with baby gloves when he interviewed him. That was really appalling to me, I have a deep understanding of the Furman tapes. And to watch him kind of gloss over that was another example of it not fitting the narrative that he was trying to portray. It was different than his narrative, much like you'll see a lot of times the media, if it doesn't fit their narrative, they won't cover it.
Well, and let's expand on that a little bit more on OJ. I know we're talking a lot about OJ, but we will, as I said, bear with us. We're going to circle back to what's going on in Syria and the way that these things are being covered. But on the other side of that, we've got the FX show, which I unfortunately have watched pretty much all of it. One of my roommates was in the process of watching it, so I would, in and out be watching it, and there were so many moments where I was just pointing things out, and in some ways, I think the FX show is maybe even more powerful because it's fictionalized and it's these actors, and there are so many moments in the FX show where, well, we don't even know if that even happened. These moments where it's to, Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. Who knows what they said to each other? Who knows if they were even in that office room together alone one night after the trial? There are scenes with, Cuba Gooding Jr., who's awful as OJ. Awful. I mean, truly appalling. And, he's like alone in a room looking guilty. I mean, we don't know that never even happened. Yet, now it's in your mind. Now it's, the power of film or television in this sense. That image is ingrained into your psyche and you believe it to be true. Now, in the first episode, there's a whole bunch of, stuff that's just completely, that was when I sort of turned it off the first time around because I could barely get past the first episode. But, a big one, Jill Shively. She's focused in the first episode, and a lot of people, came who knew that I was into this. They would point to that. Oh, look, you see? This refutes everything. And Jill Shively is this woman who came forward saying that she saw OJ, basically cut her off in traffic, speeding around 10:50 at night, and she got the license plate. And this, of course, is, proof that he did it. And the media has continually portrayed Jill Shively as correct in seeing OJ, therefore correct that OJ killed Nicole and Ronald, but because she sold her story to hard copy, the prosecution couldn't use her. And that, again, that was another blow to Clark and Darden and their sort of heroic case against this evil, evil man. Yet, again, publicly available court records prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is all BS. Yet again, people use this because it fits their narrative, it fits their agenda, their worldview on what this case is about. So, Brian, you've made another excellent short documentary, which I encourage everybody to click on it. It's in the show notes. And it breaks down the Shively story in its entirety. Quickly, what's in there? Why is Shively wrong? And then we'll kind of move on to the sort of larger topic here.
Let me quickly mention before I forget, all of the short documentaries that Pierce and I are talking about can be found at ojsimpson.gq, like the magazine, ojsimpson.gq. You can find all of my materials and all of my contact information. The Jill Shively story is quite interesting because I believe, I'm not ignorant enough to believe that I'm the first person in over 20 years to really examine the reality of Jill Shively's story against the facts of the situation and against her own testimony. I tend to believe that the reason that the media continues to prop up Jill Shively is because she personifies something. She connects her fake story is a personification of seeing the angry OJ Simpson speeding away from the crime scene.
Yes.
And it allows the public, that could be any of us, that could be our eyes. We could have been that driver if we were there that night. It could have been any of us. And it gives you that connection. It gives you that personal connection. And I believe that that's why they keep using Jill Shively, because it helps advance the narrative that they were pushing since June 13th. But when you look at Jill Shively, her own words are very easy to hang her with. Jill Shively claims that, as Pierce said, that she ran into OJ at the intersection of Bundy and San Vicente at 10:50 p.m. on June 12, 1994. Now, the first big obstacle to overcome is Cato Kalin heard the bumps. Let's think about Cato and the bumps. When did he hear the bumps? He heard them at 10:40 p.m. on June 12, 1994, and that's also confirmed by his friend Rachel Farrar, who he was on the phone with at the time. They both testified that these occurred at 10:40 p.m. So if Mr. Simpson was the person who made these three thumps, that means that in order for Jill Shively to have seen him at the intersection of San Vicente and Bundy, which is a 5-minute drive from OJ's house, OJ would have to get in his Bronco immediately after making those three thumps
and dropping the second glove, and then driving to that intersection of San Vicente and Bundy for some unknown reason to have that interaction with Jill Shively. But, let's say Rachel and Cato could have been off on their time. So, maybe Shively's story is plausible. Then we look at her actual testimony. She testifies that she was going to get a salad at the market, which is right at the intersection of San Vicente and Bundy. One of the things she does in her testimony is she never puts herself in the actual store. She says that she was going to get a salad bar, but she said that when she got there, the salad bar was down, but the store was still open, and she goes out of her way to never place herself past the doors of that store. Now, people are saying, well, how did Shively get the license plate number? One of the biggest reveals that I had myself in making this short documentary was in an interview with Charles Grodin in 1997. Shively talks about how she had to be at work at 6 a.m. Now, 6 a.m., that's first shift. She'd be at work at 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., that's the hours of first shift. When was the Bronco towed? The Bronco was towed, according to the testimony of the tow truck driver, at 3:30 p.m. Shively, who claims that she called police the morning in her interviews, the morning of June 13th, before anyone knew about the murders, and reported OJ Simpson as a drunk driver, in her words. When you compare that statement to the police report, you'll find that she didn't call the police until late in the day on June 14th, the full, 36 hours after this encounter supposedly happened at 10:50 p.m. But more importantly, Shively had an hour and a half, if she wanted to be one of the many gawkers outside of O.J. Simpson's Rockingham estate. The news started covering the story at 8:30 a.m. on June 13th. In this short documentary, I showcase a plethora of shots of the Bronco with the license plate clearly visible, meaning that not only was it broadcast, the license plate number, broadcast in images on your local newscast, and every local newscast was running those pictures. It was those pictures of the Bronco being towed and OJ being handcuffed were the two images that were available on every news channel, and by news channel I mean your local news and the national news network's broadcast on June 13th and 14th. She had numerous opportunities to copy down the license plate number from TV if she wasn't there herself. Her story is completely a joke. I mean, it's so implausible. Yeah.
Because in order to have the interaction with Jill Shively at 10:50 p.m., consider the fact that Dr. Michael Baden and Dr. Henry Lee, two of the world's most renowned criminologists in the world, both testified that the killer would be covered in blood. So you have to ask yourself, so here's allegedly OJ Simpson speeding away from the murder scenes, covered in blood, has that interaction with Jill Shively at 10:50, but by 10:55, Alan Park spots him walking out the front door of his house to drop off luggage in the courtyard of his house, and then going back in to his house. And they left for the airport at 11 p.m. So how did OJ, within 5 minutes, wash all of the blood off of his body if he killed those people, not get any blood residue on the white carpeting that lines the steps and the whole upstairs area of his house, somehow make it so none of the pipes in his house, none of the plumbing in his house had any blood or blood residue in it, according to Gil Garcetti, the LA County District Attorney. There was no blood found in the pipes or in the washing machine. How did he, within 5 minutes, go from this murderous rage to happy, cheery OJ looking spick and span, clean as a whistle? And then when did he hide the murder weapon and the bloody clothes? The story is completely implausible. And I also documented what I believe is Jill Shively or her doppelganger standing outside OJ's house on June 17th, 1994. And, you know, I have a lot of great people, thanks to your show and other places, have, been in communication with me. A lot of nice things, a lot of not nice things. And someone sent me a conversation that they had with Jill Shively on Facebook. And this really made me happy. This person sent Jill Shively the documentary and said, I'm interested to know your thoughts. Regards, Jill Shively's response, full of lies. I was never outside OJ's and a lot of other lies. I sued the guy that lied about me in the book. Now, she doesn't mention that she lost that case, but she did sue the guy. It's always something, but I'm not going to defend myself. Thanks for pointing this out. It's comical. Brian Heiss has an agenda. He's very biased, not open. Now, she just said she's not going to defend herself. Okay, here's the next message. There's no response, by the way. This is just Jill. She's not defending herself, but she's going to continue. Another message. Brian Heiss has an agenda. Can't really talk to people like this. I don't really care anymore. She doesn't care anymore, but here's another message. Again, no responses to these messages. This is just Jill. She doesn't care. She's not going to defend herself. Many problems here. I contacted the police and reported OJ as a drunk driver. I called the police after that with my knowledge of me almost hitting him on the 14. I don't know what on the 14 means because it was the 12th. 2 different calls. This guy is only putting out pieces to fit his agenda. Too sad. Again, no response. Another message from Jill. Thanks for letting me know about this. Remember, she's not defending herself and she can't really talk to people like this and she doesn't care, but here's another message. Thanks for letting me know about this. I have a defamation attorney that I'm sending this to. I'm tired of this crap out there. People love just to be mean. Thank you again. Again, remember, she doesn't care about this. She's not going to defend herself. Another message with no response. Before that, I show this to my family and they are laughing more. The person they say is me outside OJ's home is for sure not me. I'm going to go after this guy Heiss for defamation. Again, remember, she doesn't care about this. She's not going to talk about it. She doesn't care anymore. Another message. By the way, there was no response to this before her. Nothing has been debunked. Only if you take parts of the story to fit your agenda. I don't know who wrote this debunked thing, but it could fit your agenda. I don't know what that means. I was wondering if she was drinking a little wine at that point, and that was the last message from her. But she doesn't care anymore. But she sent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 messages with no responses to any of those messages to this person who was kind enough to share it with me. So I thought that was very telling.
And it's funny too that she's talking. I'm so tired of this, and it's like, tired of what? The public thinks you're a hero.
Yeah, and for the record,
no one ever, the only thing she's ever accused of is being stupid enough to sign a deal with hard copy. But nobody questions the validity of her bullshit statements about seeing him.
Well,
so, I don't know what she's talking about.
I question the validity of her bullshit statements about seeing him because she didn't see him. I proved that in this short documentary. In what is it? Is it 22 minutes?
Not even
in 22 minutes. And I also one of the things that I've always liked to use is I find some of the best material that I find comes from the books of people that believe that OJ's guilty. For example, in this book, Marcia Clark says, I didn't think that I presented a complete lie to the grand jury, but I had. And she talks about this lawsuit that Jill had when she lied about she convinced this soap actor, Brian Patrick Clark, no relation to Marcia, who's been in General Hospital, Young and the Restless, and a few other things, that this screenplay that Jill claims to have written about a man who's diagnosed with cancer and his wife is pregnant and he's going to die, and she wants him to star in it, and then she sketchily, she hadn't been paid her fee for being the screenwriter, but she wanted to get a loan from this Brian Patrick Clark guy, and he gave her $6,000. But it turns out that Jill was committing fraud because the screenplay that she presented to him was actually the movie My Life with Michael Keaton and Nicole Kidman that had not been released. It was in production. But Jill tried to pass off that screenplay as being her own and this whole movie project that she was scamming Brian Patrick Clark out of. So the woman has a history of lying, and the fact that people took her as credible is disturbing, because again, I'm not ignorant enough to believe that I'm the first person in 22 years to really examine her story against the facts.
Yeah.
And against her own testimony. So I believe that she's being used to personify, much like in Syria, you get these people that become public figures really quickly and get verified on Twitter because they've been tweeting about the war.
In a way that is favorable to the U.S. agenda.
Yeah, in a war zone, which has the best internet service ever.
Yeah. And then, you get Anderson Cooper lending his support, and, if you really want to know what's going on and the war crimes of Assad, follow some 9-year-old girl, who knows where she is.
And, it could be legitimate. Her tweets her whole story could be absolutely legitimate. It's just a little curious that someone gets verified on Twitter so quickly, at 6 years old, tweeting from a war zone. That's just strange to me.
Yeah. Well, so let's, again, Brian, let's kind of expand this out a little bit, because, you look at these things like Jill Shively and these facts, and of course then people will sort of, well, whatever, I don't care. It doesn't matter if you present these facts because I know he did it. And this obsession in America with crime and especially with murder, and this obsession and this sort of, and it's fun. I mean, I understand, it's fun being your own sleuth, your own internet sleuth and diving through these things. But of course, a lot of times people aren't really diving through court documents. What they're doing is they're watching and listening to shows like the OJ Made in America, the FX show, or things like Making a Murderer, the Serial podcast all about Hae Min Lee's murder. And they, based on that alone,
don't forget the new Fox show, You the Jury, the new Fox show.
You told me that last night.
Which America makes the decisions on these high-profile cases that they retry in an hour in front of a judge on Fox with these screens that look like they come from a football stadium. They're huge screens to show quote-unquote evidence.
Yeah, right. And I mean that alone is wild. That's greenlit, or that you can even do that. I mean, because they're talking about high profile cases, are they not? Is it that new Fox show?
The one is that Robin woman in Aruba, not Natalie Holloway, another woman in Aruba who went scuba diving with this guy Gary, whose last name I forget, and she died, and the media has created this idea that he killed her, and they retried the case in front of You the Jury. Then the guy's never been charged with the crime. Right. He was released. But the media had painted him guilty, so we're going to retry the case on You the Jury, letting America make the decisions.
Well, and God, and then, where does it end with that? Especially too, what if something were to happen, they find some new piece of evidence and they can convince a judge, oh, well, this guy is, he fits that. And they bring a trial. Even if that new evidence is totally BS or it really leads to somebody else, the perception ingrained in everyone's minds is, well, but he did it. Because I saw a trial on Fox. So,
well, it's a lot of, when I made the Shively short documentary, this great line from a Michael Jackson song, the song Billie Jean, kept ringing in my head. When the lie becomes the truth, be careful what you say before the lie becomes the truth. Hey, hey, is the line from the song. And you see it because you're presented with one aspect of what the media is covering, whether it be OJ, whether it be the making the murderer thing, and you're not presented with the full scope of the evidence. You're not presented with evidence of exoneration or evidence of guilt, and depending on the bias of these different documentaries. When I start to make one of these short films, I don't know the outcome usually before, when I sit down, for example, the notification, the LAPD notification of OJ Simpson, I didn't know what the outcome was going to be when I started making that short documentary. And because what the media presented was so different than the reality that I found, I don't try not to go into it with bias. If I find things that are bad for OJ, I'm happy to make a short documentary about it because it's about the truth. It's about bringing the facts to light is kind of my objective with things. And you don't see that in You, the Jury on Fox, or Making a Murderer, or Is OJ Innocent, the Bill Deere thing, or the Serial podcast. You don't see a lot of the full scope of the evidence presented. You just see these small snippets that are put in there to convince you to have one bias or the other. In Making the Murderer, your bias is against the police. In Is OJ Innocent? It's against Jason Simpson. One of the most interesting feedback that I got from the hopefully soon to be released OJ Veritas, the Furman Tapes documentary, was that I didn't tell the viewer how to think. I presented what was there. I didn't tell the viewer how to think. And I thought that was really interesting because the feedback and it was expressed to me by more than one person, and what they said was, most things that I watch tell me how I should feel and how I should think about this. The way I'm pushed towards this outcome when I'm watching a piece of media. And I found that really interesting because people that said this are absolutely right. Because in the various shows, in the Making Murderer, for example, you're presented with an aspect which wants you to get outraged towards a certain side of a discussion, of a conversation. And in news coverage especially about foreign affairs, but in the U.S. news coverage of foreign affairs, you are presented with one and only perspective, how you should feel about this. And there's no other answer for it. And if you give another answer for it, if you disagree with the narrative that is being pushed, especially in foreign affairs coverage, look at poor Phil Donahue in 2003, highest rated show on MSNBC, kicked off the network because he didn't agree with the Iraq War.
Right.
Highest rated show on MSNBC at the time, fired from the network because he wouldn't push the corporate message about the Iraq War. That should be very telling to everyone. So you're given certain perspectives, but a lot of this recent true crime coverage, I think there was one on the Long Island serial killer that I tried to get through one episode. It was awful.
Is that the guy who was killing prostitutes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
interesting case.
Sure, but they did an A&E reality show about it, and it was just really poor. But they were presenting a certain perspective. They had an idea of what they wanted to get out of it. And are we seeing a sort of coverage that, for example, in the state of California, appellate judges are elected by the people. Some of the Superior Court judges in California and many other states are elected by the public. Are we reaching a point that the media can caused the public to be so outraged about something, a different case. I think certainly the Avery case might be a good example, depending on that outcome, that certain judges will give in to the perspective of the public and not the letter of the law. Are we creating an environment that a judge's job is to follow the law, not public opinion? Are we creating an environment that might be different, that might force judges?
Especially when we're seeing the speed with which some of these crime documentaries are coming out, where they're almost concurrent to legal proceedings. The fear, again, particularly with like the Stephen Avery, it's like, even if in full disclosure, I think Avery killed Teresa Hallback.
Yeah.
But, it's like, even if if you're positive that he did it, you can't come out and say that. He's a hero.
Yeah.
He's the oppressed person that we should all love. This poor, dumb, white hick. It's like, why?
In 1997, after OJ Simpson was awarded custody of his children, there was a recall effort led by Tammy Bruce, who at the time was the president of the Los Angeles-based Women's Progressive Alliance. I don't know if you're familiar with Tammy Bruce. She's kind of a nut job that is a right-wing nut job who has a long and checkered, sketchy history. But she tried to have Judge Nancy Stock disbarred, and she tried to have her recalled because she ruled against the Browns in the OJ Simpson custody battle.
Jesus.
In a lot of ways, that planted the seeds for a lot of what you see today, because you're seeing Simpson case is another example with the civil verdict. Appellate judges were too afraid to give OJ a appeal hearing because they were afraid of being recalled, because the Goldman family, who currently has a full-time public relations person trying to create anti-OJ propaganda before his parole hearing, the Goldman family had threatened to mount a recall campaign against anyone that would do anything to dissuade the verdict that was issued by the civil jury. And despite the fact that Judge Fujisaki had made at least 5 clear reversible errors in the evidence that he allowed into that case, the threat by the Goldman family to mount a massive recall campaign against the jurists who voted to give him OJ an appeal hearing was too much for them to handle. And that's not my words. That's Professor Lori Levinson of Loyola College. That's her interpretation of it. So are we creating an environment that public opinion matters more than facts, and the media objective, the media outcome that they desire, is more important than facts, or, the judge's right to be following the law?
No, and what you're presenting here, Brian, is a horrifying world to live in, where the police are basically especially under, the God Emperor Trump. They have nothing to fear. At all. And you've got this criminal justice system, which is already well beyond flawed, and now a media that's totally complicit with manipulating everything. And again, what you're saying here too, talking about the way the media does this and these like TV documentaries. And at the end of the day, all they're really trying to do is not only sell you on this person is guilty or we have to go to war, but you should also be buying Viagra, Dove soap. You should only eat at KFC. And that's really their end goal, just mass materialism. That we just need to fill our lives with these empty, fucking horrible products that'll probably give us cancer on down the line. And just sort of agree to all of this. And these people are guilty. That guy is a war criminal, so we've got to bomb him immediately. And even at the end of the day, when all this is kind of, becomes known, whatever, who cares?
Now, you mentioned one of my favorite words, war criminal. We've heard a lot of war criminal in the past week in relation to Syria. And we heard a lot of different Congress people, senators, mention that Assad is a war criminal, and that may be true. It may not be true. I don't know. I wanted to bring up something that not a lot of people know about. I know that you weren't familiar with it when we talked about it last night. Here in the United States, land of the free, home of the brave, there is actually a law on the books called and this is kind of like the Patriot Act, how the name has nothing to do with actually what the law is. The American Service Members Protection Act. And the American Service Members Protection Act was signed into law by George W. Bush on August 2nd, 2002. And what this law does, it's meant to protect the service members by name. However, the heart of the law is all about the International Criminal Court, which the U.S. is one of 3 nations that's not a member of the International Criminal Court. The other 2 are also bastions of human rights, the Sudan and Israel. And the American Service Members Restoration Act, what it says is that if any current or former elected official in the United States is arrested, detained, or charged with a crime by the International Criminal Court, the president is pre-authorized to invade The Hague. So we're pre-authorized to invade the Netherlands if someone tries to hold a current or former elected U.S. official accountable for the war crimes that they may have committed during their term in office. So the United States pretty much has no accountability mechanisms for holding our leaders, George Bush, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, accountable for the war crimes that they've committed while in office. So you hear a lot about Assad's war crimes. And, I'm against, as you were, Pierce, I'm against the killing of precious little babies and children anywhere. Anywhere. I'm pretty much pacifist. However, yes, 80 people were killed in Syria, and we don't know exactly who did it because we had airstrikes before the UN could actually convene a formal investigation to be able to identify the people responsible for the chemical attack in Syria. Now, what wasn't covered in that, and that's horrific, I don't want 80 precious little children dying. I think that's horrible. I think you do too. Mm-hmm. But what hasn't been covered is on March 17th, 2017, a U.S. airstrike killed 300 innocent civilians in Mosul, Iraq, many of them precious little babies and children.
Yeah, one day.
In one airstrike.
Yeah.
Over 300 precious little babies and children and adults were killed on March 17th by a U.S. airstrike. This is fact. This is reported in the Los Angeles Times and many other places. Where's the accountability? If we're so against killing precious little babies and children, why aren't we against killing precious little babies and children when we do it?
Well,
where's the outrage against that?
Well, you know what, Brent, that just for bringing to my mind again, it's emotion. It's not reality. It's not the reality that we bombed, one airstrike in Mosul kills 300 plus people. It's not the reality that every single day Saudis are, vaporizing Yemenis.
We're helping do that too. The United States is helping do that too. We had that failed attack on, that got that gentleman killed, the U.S. Marine.
Oh, exactly. And they're going to use that guy to sell you more of that kind of bullshit. If I was a serviceman or woman, service member in the armed forces, the way that he used that person is so disgusting. Mm-hmm. But again, what's that too? It's emotion. It's not that he died in Yemen on some botched operation. It's not that, why the fuck was he even in Yemen? It's the emotion, mm-hmm. and apparently it was emotion that swayed Ivanka Trump to convince her father, you've got to launch an airstrike, Daddy, because 80 precious babies were killed.
And I think there's an important clarification that we should make. The person responsible for these, whether it be the Mosul airstrike or the incident in Yemen, the people that were outraged against, I'm talking you and I, are not the service members themselves. We're outraged against the leaders who made that decision to force them to do it. Because we've seen what happens, Chelsea Manning, for example, if you do not follow the orders and you say, no, I'm not doing this. We've seen what happens to them, so it's not really a good position to be in for a service member who doesn't quite agree with the decision made by the leader ahead of them. I mean, they're going to be in military prison for the rest of their lives if they say no.
No, exactly. And I hope the listeners are kind of understanding where we're coming with all of this. Cause this is so much of this narrative that we're seeing where we can visibly see many aspects of the truth. You can see what's going on in Mosul, but you can pretend like it's not happening. You can see that, yes, something happened in Syria a few days ago, and there were 80 people that were killed. Something was going on. You can see that's happening.
And we're against anyone being killed, period, pretty much. So the fact is, what we want is, and what everyone should want, is the facts. We want a presentation of an investigation being able to identify who is responsible for X, Y, or Z. Clear evidence to help establish who is responsible before we decide to fire missiles at someone when we don't even know if they're the person. And to throw it in the face of the United Nations, who was at the time but they were putting together a resolution to start an investigation to identify the perpetrators of that chemical attack. The fact that we acted before that is very concerning. Yeah. No, and once again, I know I probably sound like a broken record. I'm repeating myself, but it's emotion and not evidence. People are swayed by, again, too, violent images, people suffering from chemical weapons. It's a horrible image. And mangled bodies, foaming at the mouth. That's awful. But when there truly are no bodies left because the airstrike vaporized them, it's nothing. You can't really fathom it. And again, too, we're making such a big deal about these people in Syria. And, I'm just going to play the sort of realpolitik here. Even if Assad did it, it's just 80 people, So, is that more than the 200 people? It is war. Let's think realistically. What is worse? Is that worse? Why? Because it's chemicals? Personally, I believe that every human life has equal value. I believe that every human life is precious. Every human life should be, cherished. And I'm against, one person being killed by either side or any side or anyone who does it. I'm pretty much your standard anti-war person because in my lifetime, I've seen the disastrous impacts of war. When you look at, for example, the 2003 illegal invasion of Iraq under false pretenses, the idea that hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians have been killed since our intervention in a sovereign country of Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, if people remember how they felt on 9/11, that kind of same sort of bloodthirsty, want for revenge, we're all human. Don't you think that when we destroy people's homes, when the decisions of our elected officials result in people being killed and their homes being destroyed and their lives pretty much destroyed, don't you think that they have that same feeling of wanting revenge? The refugee crisis is created because of the Iraq war. We're in Syria when Syria is a sovereign nation. We haven't been invited to have troops in Syria. Russia and Iran have, but we haven't. So what we're doing there, that's illegal, but there's no accountability system in place. Because if there is, we're going to invade the Netherlands.
I know, which is such a wild, contingency plan.
That is the law in the United States, Pierce. That is the law. That if they hold us accountable for war crimes, by law, we are pre-authorized to invade the Netherlands.
Let that sink in.
Vladimir Putin can be held accountable. Vladimir Putin can be held accountable by the International Criminal Court if he commits or has committed any war crimes. However, there's not a reciprocal system of accountability for a U.S. current or former elected official if under their watch war crimes are committed. That's astonishing.
Yeah. No, that's a shocking moment of total, utter hubris and hypocrisy.
And the vote for the American Service Members Protection Act was overwhelming by both parties.
Of course, because they all know that, it doesn't matter what side you're on. There's always going to be war. There's always something to be sold to the American public overseas.
Well, it's their get out of jail free card, literally.
Yeah, no, truly. I mean, Brian, we're getting up towards the end of the show here, and I kind of, I want to see if we can kind of contextualize all this, sort of bring it all back together. And I think we've done a good effort at showing this. But looking kind of ahead, again, we're talking, we started all the way back in the mid-90s with OJ Simpson, the way that was covered by the media, the way that lies were accepted, and the way that people ultimately went with emotion and determined what the outcome of the trial was before it even happened. The same way that we move all the way up to today, people are deciding on the outcome of who launched chemical weapons before we even have the slightest bit of evidence. I don't think that these aren't connected. Where do you see this moving, on down the line? Because I'm sure there's so many of the Trump cult members who were really shocked when the God Emperor decided to completely reverse all of his, America first, this, that, and the other thing. And now, of course, they're all kind of, scrambling to say, oh, yeah, well, I hate him and I'm going to distance myself. And I secretly knew he was going to do that. But where do you see this evolving moving forward, both in a global sense, but also, in a national sense, again, like with these crime dramas and crime documentaries?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple different routes that it could take. First of all, I think that Trump probably did the attack on Syria to get his poll numbers up. Nothing helps an American elected official more than poll numbers. But one of the important distinctions of, if you look at, I'm going to pick 3 cases that were pretty big, and the media presentation of them painted these people as so guilty. And I'm not making a judgment on any of their innocence or guilt, but they were all painted by the media as being absolutely guilty, no question about it. OJ Simpson, Casey Anthony, and George Zimmerman. And what's interesting is that in all 3 of those cases, the jurors went against the media and what the media was spewing, and they were able to, in some cases, I'm only really familiar with one of them. They were able to look at the facts because they were the only people that heard all of the evidence presented. And in all of those 3 cases, I think it's fair to say that the jurors in all of those 3 cases were the only people that heard all of the evidence presented, and it wasn't filtered through a talking head on TV. Now, when you talk about a larger geopolitical implications of that, I think that we currently have an administration that shares the immediate past administration, shares the Obama administration values of secrecy. And they believe in funneling out information in such a way that it doesn't present real evidence or real facts to back up their position. They tend to leak it through sources. I tend to think that the current administration is going to continue it, and considering that there are 6 companies that own 90% of media outlets in the United States, most, if not all of them, have major government contracts, I tend not to see them dissuade from their position of being gung-ho pro-war. And to me, that's very troubling, because I believe that we've seen the tragedies, the countless lives lost and the countless lives shattered from our invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan in 2002 and 2003. And the idea that Americans don't look at other people throughout the world as being humans and being just like us is very troubling to me. That we don't recognize the preciousness of human life, whether they be in Sacramento, California, or Mosul, Iraq, that we don't see them the same, and we don't recognize that we're all human, and maybe we should start there as a good basis. And we continue to demonize people based on their religion or their different beliefs that they have. And that's very troubling because you're painting a broad brush stroke and you're forming a lot of unnecessary hatred.
No, I totally agree with you. It is a sad state that we're in, and unfortunately, it doesn't, despite all of the promises from the great leader, it was all a lie, I mean, again, this is the man who's supposed to be, smart, and he understands the way the world works, and he was as easily, if not more so, swayed by his own emotions of seeing, the precious babies being killed.
Well, he was swayed by a YouTube video.
Yeah, exactly. That his daughter showed him.
This is a guy that tweets when he's watching Fox News. I'm just glad that he didn't watch a show like Designated Survivor and he didn't propose that he start his first 100 days over again.
Right, exactly.
Peter Sutherland did in that show. Yeah. But it's quite scary. And, one thing I want to mention is, I have a question for you. Who is next to Muhammad, who is the second most revered prophet in the Islam religion?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's Jesus, who's probably the most mentioned.
Right. You're absolutely right. It's Jesus Christ. And I mention that to point out that we're more similar than we understand.
Oh, well,
and that there's a lot more common ground between these religions and these people that we demonize through propaganda than a lot of people recognize, because almost no one gets that answer right when I ask them that question, Pierce. And I think that if we're able to recognize our common ground and look at all humanity as being precious and all life as being precious, that might be a good start. And also some self-examination from both sides would be a good thing.
Yeah, no, and again, too, the self-examination, and also just look at, be aware that the way that the media has evolved since the 90s on, and I mean, of course, before that as well. I mean, let's not kid ourselves, but I really do think that the 90s was this sort of transitional phase.
Like you said, where we saw CNN's ratings went up 800% covering OJ, and then you saw that adaptation of that salacious, that kind of New York Post kind of coverage slowly go to every broadcast outlet because they recognize that the public's more eager to look at the car accident and rubberneck on the side of the road when they're driving by, looking at the accident, seeing what they can see, than they are in actually examining facts. And that's that's just a sad reality. And as that Michael Jackson song says, be careful what you do before the lie becomes the truth.
Exactly. And please be aware of that when it comes to all facets of this, whether we're talking about going to war in Syria or we're talking about, a woman accused of killing her daughter. There is a reason too that, I think that's the other thing too I want to impart with people, is that the criminal justice system is incredibly flawed, but thank God it at least exists. And if we continue to degrade it, and we continue to let the media manipulate it to such an extent where, as you were saying, judges are becoming afraid to rule in a certain way because of a documentary show on Netflix. That's really scary.
Most importantly, understand that, especially with higher profile cases, almost always you can find all of the official transcripts, you can find police reports, PDFs of that online. And the thing that always surprises me most is we're in a world that at our fingertips, literally, and as we're walking around in the middle of nowhere, we have access to all of this information, all of the factual information, not given to us through the strain of the talking heads. We can actually look at the source material, but so often we choose not to do that because we have a lot of other things going on in our lives. And I would just say if something's important enough to you, if you care enough about something, try to seek out the source material in order to gain a better understanding that might not come to you through the prism of the talking heads.
Excellent, excellent. Brian Heiss, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Of course, please check out all of Brian's work. It will be linked up in the show notes. Next week, Tom Secker and I will be discussing the finale of Homeland. Very exciting.
news and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom, American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me in American Freedom Radio. Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys, because they have all the technology, they have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Nutritious food is real body armor. It builds muscle, burns fat, improves digestion, and feeds the entire body the nutrients it needs. Did you know the U.S. government banned the hemp plant from growing in the United States and classified it as a Schedule I drug to hide it behind the marijuana plant? People have been confused about this plant for over 80 years, and many still don't know what hemp is. So now you know hemp is not marijuana, and marijuana is not hemp. They are different varieties of the same species. HempUSA.org wants the world to know these basic facts and to help people understand that hemp protein powder is the best kept health secret you need to know about. Remember, hemp protein powder contains 53% protein, is gluten-free, anti-inflammatory, non-GMO, and is loaded with nutrients. Call 888-910-4367, 888-910-4367, and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.